Hello, good morning and welcome. It's Thursday, June the 12th, the morning after the night before. My name is Sam Coates of Sky News.
And I'm Anne McElvoy from Politico. Welcome to Politics at Sam and Anne's, the podcast that gives you everything you need to know about the day ahead in British politics.
So after the spending review, the government now says it's gone line by line through every item of government spending, allocated all the budgets for the next 3 years, and they won't quite go as far as saying there is now not a penny going to waste anywhere in the public sector, but spending mistakes from here on in certainly can't be blamed on their Tory predecessors. Labour are properly running the country. They have made their big bet for this parliament.
And that alone, Sam, is an interesting acknowledgement. It feels like, to quote Tony Blair, it's a new dawn, is it not? And Rachel Reeves told MPs last night to go out and sell the spending review to constituents directly, in essence, without apology. There's going to be a big push to inform the public that this government has turned the corner on tax and spend. And we've been previewing for days that defence and health were going to be the two biggest winners. The Home Office, arguably the loser. And while the education budget went up, the schools budget rises were just 0.4% a year. And of course, unprotected departments, culture, etc., really not faring well this time.
If you listen to the statement in the Commons chamber, which, to be honest, Paul Johnson, the head of the IFS, was very rude about, he said that the Chancellor's speech was full of numbers, few of them useful. It did feel like confetti made of millions and billions was falling from the ceiling as she made her speech. And this is weird because it was a speech with two different types of spending. Generous spending on capital projects, one-off spending on things like infrastructure, but the squeeze is on elsewhere. And the biggest consequence, the biggest thing that the papers draw this morning is that level of spending coupled with that level of squeeze in other areas is going to mean tax rises are coming in the autumn. Fascinatingly, Rachel Reeves rolled out a new formulation yesterday. She said there is nothing in this spending review which requires any tax rises. Now, I have to say, Anne, that's awfully reminiscent of what we were hearing this time last year in the election campaign, where she told us, straight-faced, that nothing in this manifesto requires any tax rises. And we all know what happened in the autumn after that.
I signed a contract for a car hire company recently, which felt a bit like this, you know. when they then sent me some, massively kind of unwelcome email afterwards about what I owed them for something, he said, well, there was nothing in the original document that ruled this out. And I think that is exactly what you've put your finger on the pain point there. It doesn't tell you anything about what's going to happen after this week.
I think Anne is telling us that she might have pranged a hire car, but we'll gloss on from that.
Oh, great. Well, there goes my insurance. Thanks, Sam Coates. And more on that on a moment so that Sam doesn't go down that route any further. Leading the Politico London playbook this morning is the news first reported by CBS that Israel is ready to launch an operation into Iran, and the US State Department has ordered non-emergency embassy staff to leave neighbouring Iraq as well. So that is a massive developing story over the weekend. It does look like Donald Trump is really ready to move and put the forcing move on Iran that he has been promising or threatening for some time, depending on your view.
Yeah, he was the president of the US was making remarks that leaned into the idea that was coming soon. So brace for that. There's another potentially massive international story that would have Britain at the heart of it if it goes ahead. And that is that President Trump's administration is suddenly formally threatening to scrap the AUKUS submarine deal. Now, for those that don't remember, this is the US, UK, Australia pact, first announced when Boris Johnson was Prime Minister, to build nuclear power attack submarines. Now, if you remember, what happened was that the French were going to build some nuclear submarines for the Australians, and effectively the UK and the US swooped in and stole that contract to the absolute abject fury of Paris. Now, that it sounds as if there might be some kind of reversal. There had been some distant sort of tom-tom drums suggesting that there were some in the Trump administration who weren't happy with the AUKUS deal. Now it sounds as if there's a much more formal review into this. Now, obviously, although it's never spelled out quite in public and on the record, the whole point of AUKUS is that the UK, the US, and Australia are effectively upping their defense capability to contain China. That's sort of the idea of it. Now, I don't know whether it's a coincidence, but right now there are discussions, trade discussions going on between the US and China. I don't know whether that has anything to do with it, anything to do with the timing, whether it just means it's a little play and then this review goes away. What do you make of it all, Anne?
Well, I think this is very significant for our defence policy because so much has been pitched around AUKUS. It's interesting. You used the word stole there to say how much this was seen as, to put it another way, a rather nifty move by the AUKUS members, Britain, Australia, and the US to set up. And you're absolutely right. It is a nuclear submarine pact, but the broader strategic significance was to contain and also to put a line in the sand there against China and on the whole threat of what might happen in the South China Sea. Well, that is at the very least on the back foot because a review has been ordered by the White House into whether this fits the America First agenda. You may well be right that relations with China are really driving this, but there is something else. The Defense Department official Elbridge Colby, Bridge Colby, as he's known in defence circles, who's quite a character, and I have interviewed at length, is leading this review. And he's a very well-informed man. He has very strong views of his own, but he particularly thinks, for instance, that the looming confrontation with China potentially is much more important than, say, the Russia-Ukraine war. That's just to put him in a bit of a nutshell. And he is a skeptic of AUKUS, and he is unlikely, I think, to come out of this review just saying, AUKUS is fine, leave it alone. I mean, you don't start reviewing things with that in mind, and knowing Elbridge Colby a bit, I think as John Bolton, the former National Security Advisor, also rather outspoken, said, theoretically, you could come out of this saying, let's increase the number of submarines we build together. But as Bolton says, I doubt that will be the review's conclusion. So where will it leave Britain's reliance on AUKUS? And also, where does it leave this whole idea of defence multilateralism?
And where does it leave some of the calculations behind the spending review and the strategic defence review when it comes to the military reindustrialization of this country? Because building those Australian submarines was absolutely core to the sort of reindustrialization promise. That's apart from anything else, could potentially be a hit to British business. Let's just look briefly before we go into detail on the spending review. Another massive potential political story that I want to do right at the top of the podcast because I felt it was deliberately dropped below the radar by government, and I want to re-up it so that people see it. The Work and Pension Secretary, Liz Kendall, yesterday wrote a letter to the DWP Select Committee saying those hugely controversial PIP disability allowance cuts that were announced in March are going to go ahead as planned. Now, a lot of MPs are very worried about this. Some MPs are asking for some kind of review or assessment of what was going on. She is saying, no, there isn't time. So the government has decided, and I think Rachel Reeves was sort of hinting about this on Monday, that it is going to stand firm in the face of a disability cuts rebellion. Okay, so there are lots of unhappy MPs, and the government has, despite some newspaper stories and some reporting to the contrary, the government is going to hang tough. Right, I can tell you, Anne, that is brave. I know people right near the top of government that are not sure that the government, even though it's got a very big majority, actually has the numbers to withstand this because of the scale of unhappiness, because of the scale of the cuts that are involved. Remember some of those projections back from March. People were losing £6,000, £7,000, £8,000 or wouldn't get in the future sums, some of them in the 5 figures of losses. So I think that there is going to be an almighty battle. So on a day where the government wanted to look like it was spending in another part of government. Actually, they're saying, no, we're not backing down. It's going to be fascinating to see whether they hang tough and are able to withstand the rebellion that inevitably is going to face them on this subject. Buckle up.
That is a great spot of something that I'm sure the government is not hoping goes near the top of anybody's agenda this morning. On the other hand, they have clearly decided, haven't they, that they're going to lean into these swinging benefit cuts and are happy to be, well, happy is the wrong word, but content to be defined as such. Because Liz Kendall writing this letter, yes, I think there's a bit of the good day to bury bad news aspect about it, but it was going to loom large at some point. And therefore, it would seem that the message from Rachel Reeves is we are investing, this is a very future-facing spending review, all of those talking points we heard until we couldn't hear them anymore. Our ears were rattling yesterday about how forward-looking and optimistic this all was, at the same time as a really sensitive point for Labour, as you suggest, Sam, is going to be how far do the backbenchers, how far do those who support Labour more broadly in the country accept this argument? There isn't time. Well, I mean, there's kind of always time to phase cuts if you choose there to be time. But this is something I think the government does repeatedly, which say that there is some kind of external reason why it's doing the thing that it has decided to do. I don't believe that these pit rebellions are over, do you?
I don't think so, no. Right, let's go through some of the other bits of the spending review. It was presented as £20 billion a year on infrastructure for railways, roads and power. And Rachel Reeves very much wanting to suggest that this will spur the economy from the current levels of sluggish growth. One of the interesting things was I think, broadly speaking, success, or certainly I think they think so, of the Deputy Prime Minister's negotiation with the Chancellor. So you'll remember, if you wind back, Angela Rayner was challenging Rachel Reeves, saying she wasn't taxing enough and there needed to be more money for day-to-day public services. She suggested a number of taxes on things like banks. Now, she has managed to secure quite a good deal without that happening yet, an above inflation rise in council budgets, but also over 40 billion for affordable housing, albeit that is spread over a decade. It's the kind of little accounting trick that you have to watch with the government. This is a multi-year settlement, including over periods where it is not clear that Rachel Reeves will be Chancellor and Angela Rayner will be Deputy Prime Minister, but leaving that to one side. And so that, I think in the Treasury's eyes, hands the baton back to the department that Angela Rayner runs to deliver those 1.5 million new homes a year, that very tough target that the government set itself. Now, I was sitting in the studio with Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Darren Jones, yesterday, and I said, right, so you've given all this money. Does that mean 1.5 million is definitely happening? And ever the silky performer, Darren Jones replied that, well, as far as the funding is concerned, yes, but of course that 1.5 million homes depending on an awful lot of other factors, planning, reforms, incentive for developers and stuff like that. But as far as the financial side was concerned, they were content that they'd given them enough to deliver that. So that was the sound of the ball being thwacked back over the net to the other side of the court. What I do know is that Angela Rayner's department are pretty happy. How do I know it? Because they were cheering, in fact, partying on Tuesday night, the night before the spending review. Can you believe it? People had parties on Tuesday night before the spending review. Other cabinet ministers were perhaps at more refined events. I don't know what I'm referring to. MPs in Angela Rayner's gang were invited to what was billed as some kind of planning meeting. And it basically turned into a massive karaoke night out. I only know this because MPs who weren't invited were rather jealously and sulkily complaining about this to me yesterday. It sounded like quite the night. Anyway, those who weren't invited won't be forgetting that. A little bit of internal Labour Party politics for you there.
My mind turned immediately to what would be on the decks at a karaoke night based around housing and planning. And I think I've nailed it, Sam. I'm going to go with Madness, Our House in the Middle of Our Street. Mood-wise, you've put your finger on it, right? And this is, I think, if we switch to what we think more broadly about this spending review. Now, Angela Rayner, the most out there member of the cabinet when it comes to karaoke nights, but also letting her feelings show. And it's a really interesting way that she does convening power. Yes, people who weren't invited will be cross. I'm sure there were reasons behind inclusions and omissions. But of course, if you were invited, you feel like Team Rayner really did pretty well. You are absolutely spot on. I saw the interview that you did with Ed Conway with Darren Jones, which is, I always feel like Darren Jones is like listening to a very clever pensions advisor telling you that your fund may be worth 3 million in the future, or it may not, depending on the international markets, etc. And I think what he was saying is, yes, there is money now, so get on with it. Put the ball back across the net to those who are supposed to deal with the planning complications, etc. Also back to Angela Rayner, as it turns out, the karaoke queen. But it does mean that this is over a very long period of time. And that brings me to the thought that this spending review relies greatly on messaging to people that money is going in now into things that are going to take many years to deliver after the life likely of those in power right now, but that is in some way responsible, it is forward looking, and that you can kind of get people out of the eternal present in their minds. That's quite a gamble, isn't it? When we look at the way that voters have behaved in the last few years, they've been very reactive. They've swung around. They've called for change when they didn't get change or not what they wanted. They've swung the other way. And this is a bet that Labour is taking, that if it is focused on the future of the country, and we broadly speaking, more people go with this vision than the opponents, that we will give them credit for it. But it's typical, for instance, that you've got that 40 billion for affordable housing over 10 years. I spoke to a major business figure in Kent involved in all of these planning, one of the biggest people there who's involved with all these planning decisions, who said, I don't think we'll see houses here for 20 years in many cases. There'll be some, but there won't be the scale. So this is really what I'm pointing to, is like, how long can they really make this work? They will have to keep coming back to this narrative. It's really now what they're staked on.
Yes, I think a lot of the Labour MPs are looking now at exactly what happened when, and I think the when is key, because you can allocate the budgets, but there are an awful lot of other blockages in the system, from planning to NIMBYs to political tides that go in and go out. I was taking the temperature of Labour MPs, and what's clear is how happy you are about the spending review depends on whether or not your constituency gets some kind of project or sweetie. You are the beneficiary of a bit of the Chancellor's largesse. And if you didn't, you're not sure that you love it. One Northern MP was saying to me, look, it's just not great from a constituency point of view, what we heard yesterday. There were lots of nice national messages. Of course there were, for sure. And in time, I'm sure they'll have an impact, they said. But it's hard for those places without a shiny infrastructure project or specific funding not to compare yourself to those places that have received things to much fanfare in the chamber. I'm delighted for those places, they said, but my constituents want to know they matter to this government as well. Just that there is a scratchiness in the Labour Party, and even though £113 billion of capital projects has been largely dished out now, there will always be a clamour for more spending, which is partly why there is such nervousness about whether or not this is the moment that Rachel Reeves has drawn the line, and beyond it, she will not go in terms of spending. Is this as much spending as this government will do and no further? Or are we just going to have the looming spectre of tax rises, be it council tax rises or other things?
One of the biggest factors here will be the future health budget increase. And what's interesting there, Sam, is exactly that phenomenon that you describe is going to be more visible more quickly than perhaps in other areas, because we have the Wes Streeting long-awaited 10-year plan for the NHS coming out next month. There'll be no more money for that at this point, but he did get a pretty good settlement for now. Now, there's exactly the kind of area where you need future investment at scale for massive transformation. We might talk about in a minute. But it seems to me, if you're West Streeting, you're happy this week and your teams, but are you so content that you can do what you want to do in that very ambitious, as we're being signalled, 10-year plan for workforce transformation, for IT investment, etc., on the base that you've got? Or again, do you look like you'll be saying, well, we got waiting lists down a bit, you should be happy about that, voters who've been beneficiaries, but the overall transformation, well, we hope that there's the money there to oil the wheels as we go through the next decade. What did you think about that?
I think that the 10-year plan is a really pivotal moment for the government. We'll get it next month, probably on the anniversary of the NHS's foundation. And it's going to require some really big transformational heavy lifting, because Darren Jones, again, in the Sky studio yesterday, saying that there was going to be no more money for reform. This is it. The budgets are set. Now, and I don't want you and I to become the Rachel Reeves of this podcast, forever setting ourselves limits and then being in danger of busting them. And I am looking at that clock and I am thinking that we have no headroom left. However, there is just dropped the worst possible news for Rachel Reeves as she embarks on a morning round of interviews. The ONS has just said that the UK economy shrank by 0.3% in April, according to its latest data. That's partly because of a contraction in services and partly production, which went down by 0.6%. That is not great news. A contraction in the economy ultimately means less money going into the economy in tax. It ultimately will mean judgment about whether or not she is promoting growth in the context of her decisions last October to raise taxes. I am not sure they are going to be happy in the Treasury this morning at the card that they have been dealt, and that will cast a big shadow over the whole of the day. What do you think in 30 seconds?
I will do it in a thumbnail, Sam, as you're right. We're right over our time this morning. So much to talk about. But one, I do think it must be dawning on Team Reeves that the messages that they sent to business about the UK and how to go about growth, that they lost the plot, they lost the narrative on that. They've had to sort of swing away, from just this big focus on fiscal events to try to say like growth is coming, but it does not look like it's coming back very soon. And as far as I'm concerned, and I want to give the government a fair shout on this and trying to do a very, very difficult spending review. All this last news that you've just broken for us, it means is that the headline "tax rises are coming" is moving, in text speak, from about 11-point size to 20-point and beyond. This is going to be an unignorable message, and it isn't the one with which Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer would have wanted to end this week of the spending review.
On Monday, we were told that the winter fuel allowance was being restored to most pensioners because the economy was doing better. So what are they going to do? Take it away again? Mm-hmm. Anyway, let's stop. We've gone over our limits, and we don't want to have to pay the price, and we don't want our listeners to have to pay the price. So thank you very much indeed. That's it for this week's Politics at Sam and we will be back on Monday.
We will.
My goodness, I don't know what the globe is going to look like. I don't know what politics is going to look like. But it's been an exciting week, and next week will be too. Keir Starmer is off on his travels. We will be here. See you then.
Indeed. Angela Rayner style, buckle up.